One of my most revered education scholars is someone I call the other Elliot, English cat of education, John Elliott. Through him, I learnt a way of thinking about planning and carrying out teaching and learning he calls philosophically based curriculum development. I think it describes what I've been trying to do as a classroom music educator for the last 30 years and continue to pursue. But what does philosophy have to do with curriculum? That's a great question, Professor Rajelski.
It ultimately goes back to the question, what of all could be taught is most worth teaching? And some of it can answer is what of all that should be taught can I teach well and effectively? But when I pose that question, I immediately slide into, well, to answer it, you're doing philosophy. I don't care whether you like it or not, but you're doing philosophy. So when you're doing philosophy, then you've got some rules to go by. You can't just say whatever you think you want or you believe. You've got some rules to go by, like you need to know what's already been said on a topic.
So, what of all that could be taught is most worth teaching, and what of all that should be taught can I teach well and effectively? This can be pretty daunting, but I think it's good news because it suggests to me that we might start out with a very thin wedge of what we can teach, but we can build on our content knowledge and our pedagogical knowledge so that we might initially answer not much and not very well, but build on that each term and each year. Why would Rajelski call this the ultimate question? Let's look to Elliott and Silverman for some further guidance. They say it's because our thoughts and actions are intimately and inextricably linked. Our assumptions, beliefs, mindsets, and interpretations inform and drive our actions, and our actions feed back to and have an impact on our assumptions and beliefs. Whether teachers realize it or not, every teaching, learning decision, and action we carry out is guided by what we assume, believe, or think. It's essential for us as educators to continuously examine our assumptions and the assumptions that guide the decisions and actions of stakeholders. They say that staying alert for assumptions is vital because they're stealthy and they sink into our minds subconsciously. Which assumptions, beliefs, and interpretations of basic concepts are most reasonable and justifiable? This is for you to decide, according to your skills, your understandings, and most important, your own critical thinking and critical reflection. Or, as Eleanor Roosevelt says, the choices we make are ultimately our responsibility. Elliott and Silverman describe critical thinking as the self-guided and self-disciplined process of examining our own and others' assumptions, beliefs, claims, and actions in a way that is logical, well-informed, balanced, and empathetic. A critical thinking educator, they argue, develops a disposition to question carefully both old and new ideas, to balance thinking and feeling, to question authority, to participate in critical and ethical dialogue with others, to construct thoughtful viewpoints, to think imaginatively, to make judgments that are fair and rational, and to apply the results of critical thinking in actions that are congruent with personal beliefs and desired outcomes. A critically reflective educator assesses why and how their past thoughts, emotions, and actions have shaped their current ways of thinking and doing. Critical reflection challenges us to evaluate what should be kept, reconsidered, or changed to guide future decisions. In music education, critical thinking and reflection serves as essential links between theory and practice, because as Elliott and Silverman remind us, our thoughts and actions are influenced both by our unique and our shared social, cultural, historical, gendered, economic, political, and ethical circumstances. They believe that meaningful music teaching requires us to adopt critically reasoned beliefs and concepts about the natures and values of music, education, and music education. If we want to ensure music is taught for the greatest benefit of students, our pedagogical decisions must be reflective, intentional, and responsive to the realities of the world around us. In honour of Professor Rajelski, I call this critical reflection sliding into philosophy. And I slide into philosophy and jam with the cats. Because when I slide into philosophy, there are some rules to go by. I can't just say whatever I want or believe. I have to know what's already been said on a topic, by the cats of music education. But what I take from them is for me to decide according to my skills, my understanding, and most important, my own critical thinking and critical reflection. And this is how I developed my philosophy of music education. As Eleanor Roosevelt says, it's expressed in the choices I make. But Freire points back to Aristotle, reminding us that the purpose of all this theorizing, modelling and reflecting is to produce better actions. So yes, we make choices about what we take from the cats, but these choices inform our actions. Freire explains that we must have a clear and lucid grasp of our action, which implies a theory, whether we wish to or not. There is no dichotomy between theory and practice. Practice acquires a new significance when it is illustrated by a theory. Back to D and M, who say that every teaching learning action we carry out is influenced by our conceptions, beliefs, assumptions, and decisions about all concepts and questions at the centre of our field. Thus, if we want to teach or act as well-prepared, effective, educative, ethical, and professional music educators, then we must get our heads together about the who, why, what, where, whether, and when of music teaching and learning, as well as how to implement these concepts in action. Aristotle calls these questions the septum circumstantiae, which he used to try to understand what human beings need to live life at its best. He reminds us that the who and the why are the most important, and that making assumptions about these questions results in voluntary actions being carried out which lead to great sorrow and regret. I'm very keen to have as little sorrow and regret as possible, so I've shuffled the order of the septum circumstantiae questions around and made a recursive model for sliding into music education philosophizing, or my critically reflective practice, which reminds me to consider and reconsider the who and the why before I move on to think about the what and the how. These questions are reflected in the original medical model of evidence-based practice, which addresses the who, why, and where by giving equal credence to the practitioners' and patients' voices and their context. Based on that research, I've offered a version of the medical model adapted for education I call Educative Evidence-Based Practice, or EEBP, where teachers' and students' voices are heard and their unique contexts are taken into account in conjunction with the best available evidence. I use the word educative because I hope the model will empower teachers and students to make decisions about teaching and learning in their own unique contexts, sliding into philosophy as they consult the evidence base. So another way of thinking about finding out what's already been said on a topic is looking to the evidence from research. Elliott and Silverman define educative teaching and learning as practices that prioritize the care, growth, and positive transformation of students as individuals, emphasizing the teacher's role in making decisions that best serve each student's interests. Educative teaching and learning foster teacher and student agency in classroom decision-making. It requires teachers to consider the end purpose of learning experiences and make value judgments to determine the best actions for students' personal growth, in line with democratic ideals and social consciousness. The approach emphasizes that teaching is educative when it involves thoughtful judgments and decisions that prioritize educational values over mere evidence of effectiveness. Teaching and learning experiences are educative when they facilitate students' continuous growth and renewal and prepare and motivate students for future experiences. But educative evidence-based practice is not just about using research evidence. It's also about valuing and using the education, skills, and experiences that you have as a teacher. Furthermore, it's about considering each student's situation and values when making a decision, as well as considering characteristics of the classroom context in which you are interacting with each student. This requires judgment and artistry, as well as science and logic. I call the process that teachers use to integrate all of this information pedagogical reasoning. When you take these four elements and combine them in a way that enables you to make decisions about the education of a student, then you are engaging in educative evidence-based practice. Based on my research, I'm developing an approach to sliding into philosophy or critical reflection I call dialogic critically reflective practice, or DCRP. It's a way to do EEBP where teachers and students critically reflect on what's happening in their classroom in dialogue with one another, both in the classroom and in larger communities of practitioners. They explore and discuss what's happening in their classroom in relation to evidence of good practice, which might be books or journal articles, or maybe demonstration of practice via video, etc. To summarise, I aim to answer classroom music education's ultimate questions for myself, to produce better actions, and to increase the size of the wedge. What can I teach well and effectively? To achieve this aim, I carry out educative, evidence-based practice through dialogic, critically reflective practice, which involves doing some real-time sliding into philosophy, illustrating my actions with some theory through jamming with the cats, and trying to fold it all into my practice. We've looked at Rajelsky's ultimate questions, what should be taught, and of all that should be taught, what can I teach well and effectively? But your answers are up to you to decide. But remember, whether you like it or not, when you ask these questions, you're sliding into philosophy, and there are some rules to go by. Once you've finished with that, there are just 6 more circumstantiae to ask before we start again.